we have Nathaniel Rose. And Nathaniel is going to be covering building global entities for virtual communities. And we're very delighted to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Let's get started. I only have 10 minutes for 26 slides. So I'll go ahead and do a quick intro by asking the crowd a question. Raise your hand if you know what a decentralized autonomous organization is. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're a part of a DAO. Yeah? Raise your hand if you like raising your hands. Yeah? That's checking for false positives, right? So a bit about myself. Hey, everyone, I'm Nate Rose. I am a senior software engineer at Ripple. Actually, a round of applause for XRP for announcing XLS20. We now have native NFTs on the mainnet, so a round of applause for them. Yeah, you guys can give it. Yeah, they can give it. So yeah, I focus on data engineering, data infrastructures, but specifically, I've been doing a lot of research around DAOs just to really understand the space because someone has to figure out how to do this at an enterprise level or at an enterprise scale, right? So we're gonna be talking about conceptually, this might be a beginner talk for a lot of folks, just conceptually about what's happening around virtual communities, global virtual communities. Talk about an overview of DAOs and how they're being implemented, and then we'll look at just DAOs and XRPL interoperability if you're interested, right? So I actually like to start by talking about the past 10 years, specifically here in the States. So I'm from New York City. I like to talk about BLM, Black Lives Matter. This is a virtual community that was actually spawned out of Twitter through a hashtag, right? And they were able to become a global nonprofit organization through mechanisms that are quite familiar to this space, decentralization, right? So there is no one head. This was actually started by Alicia and Puyan and a few other folks who were really passionate about the outcomes of law enforcement in the States. And we could recognize virtual communities by being web native, like Wall Street Bets, like the open source community that is quite familiar if you're a developer, for being able to come together over a system, come together over an initiative, or come together over a project, and be able to communicate and share experiences, share intelligence, and get something completed. And we're organizing around different mechanisms, different tools, Discord, Blind, Parlor, and it kind of begs the question, how do we organize in a flat hierarchical way virtually, right? We want to have some sort of transparency, especially when it comes to trustlessness. This is something that we, as the blockchain community, are quite familiar with. How do we build trust between people who are virtual entities, virtual identities that are on the internet? How do we provide transparencies to our organizations as well? So if you're a nonprofit organization like BLM or you're an NGO, how do you give insights to your finances that you want to trust your stakeholders and your investors that you're executing and you're committing to the initiatives that you said you declared? And can we incentivize our early adopters and our members so that there is a way for them to be celebrated for being those early adopters? So this is where DAOs potentially can come in. So decentralized, I want to move away from this capitalistic kind of explanation of DAOs, because DAOs, we have to look at it as an organizational concept that is ephemeral, or it could be decentralized and can be implemented in an ephemeral way. So decentralized, meaning there is no central leadership, autonomous, meaning the idea takes on a life of its own, and organization, the common concept of organization is just a group of people who are looking to gather around an idea. And there is different use cases of how DAOs are being implemented. So some novel use cases that I really like to go through is the Research DAO, which is actually a way to promote revision through scientific literature, which is if you find a PhD student at King's College or the Imperial College, they are not incentivized greatly for doing peer reviews on the literature that they're producing, yet we have so much investment in scientific literature that is produced by academia. There's creative DAOs. This is something that is very interesting and very fundamental to the NFT space, which provides shared ownership, co-ownership. There's something called Links DAO that is shared ownership of golf courses across the globe. And then there's civic DAOs, which is another use case that's pretty novel. There's the Brooklyn DAO and the Bronx DAO, which is I'm a part of, which you're able to actually build some sort of HOA, community investment, so that you have another means to invest in specific projects that are going to uplift your community. And we're seeing different waves. I think the most common use case right now is using DAOs for managing DeFi protocols, which is quite identical to the technology, to the open source technology. And we can see the market. So back in 2020, 2019, the DAO treasury, so this is stats that's coming from DeepDAO, the DAO treasury across all DAOs was about 700 million. This is a capture of DAO's treasury, so the amount of digital value across DAOs has grown up to 10 billion, and this is during a crypto winter, right? I like this slide because this is really just breaks down, if you get anything from this talk that only has 4 minutes left apparently, it's the breakdown between how we think about communities on the internet, how do we think about business associations, B Corps, C Corps, nonprofits, things that have their own embedded governance in subsidiaries or in different countries, and then how do we think about DAOs, right? So with communities, there's no barriers of entry. You could join the community, you could get signed up. There's global accesses, but the weaknesses is that you can't get people to commit to anything, right? With B Corps and C Corps, the benefits are quite clear. There's mechanisms that get you onboarded into building your own startup, building your own organization. They're recognized by the state. But the problem is that it requires a lot of overhead, a lot of capital to be able to provision these sort of organizations. And then there's DAOs, which really don't have a clear understanding of how they're being regulated, but they're still being implemented. And that's because they are really great for different use cases. One example could be for ephemeral uses. Ephemeral just meaning, hey, we need a temporary DAO to execute on an initiative. One example was the Constitution DAO, which is also a bad example because they're, well, that's just a matter of like the treasury is visible, so you could just outbid them to get the outcome of the Constitution that you want to bid for. But it shows that if you want to organize a group of people for a certain amount of time, you could go ahead and dissolve that after the initiative is executed. And here are the issues with DAOs. So there's a lot of poor infrastructure. This leads to managing a DAO is quite chaotic just because of the noise. There's no really organic ramp on how we build centralization. There's going to be community leaders or DAO leaders within a DAO who want to propose or people naturally or organically gather around because of their perspective. How do we build mechanisms that are on-chain or maybe off-chain for them to be able to build the centralization that is audited? And then the legality of it, I already touched on this. Working for Ripple, I'm quite familiar with SEC, and I watch that quite closely. But yeah, the legality of it, but there's a few things. There's kind of there is hope because we see that Wyoming and Delaware are now have new DAO statutes that recognize DAOs as LLCs and business entities. There's navigating smart contracts. So if you provision a DAO, it's quite analogous to launching a rocket. Once you launch it into space, it becomes vulnerable. You have to make sure that you've done all the constructing and formulating of how that DAO is going to operate because the smart contracts are immutable, right? So once you provision it and you deploy it and someone finds a vulnerability in it and they drain your treasury, that was a failed DAO, right? So we need to find best practices in the space on how do we think about decentralized autonomous organizations by using confident smart contracts. And this is an ask for developers and software engineers to come into the space. Upfront costs and gas fees, that's across the board when it comes to the space. Fiat off-ramps and on-ramps as well. and volatility. So how do we, if I'm issuing tokens, we want someone to join our DAO to have a voting proposal or voting token so that they're able to place a vote on proposals that are being inducted by the DAO. Is there a commodified value to that token? How do I provide liquidation that I'm confident in so that I'm able to switch between the tokens, and if someone wants to leave the DAO, they're able to do so. I have 5 seconds, it looks like. So I'll say this last few things, that DAOs are still being implemented. There's a lot of folks who are using it for jobs. There's some individuals who actually are employed by DAOs, and the ask for you is actually to start studying and understanding DAOs a little bit better, because it's not just a capitalistic kind of way to, how do we build around a collection or NFT project, but how can we rebase and revamp and revolutionize organizations and entities from the top down to something that's quite flat. Thank you.